My Bubby Rose arrived barefoot and penniless at Ellis Island. Only 17 years old, an age today that means preparing for college essays and the SATs, she and my Zadie Joe, two kids, left their families in Eastern Europe to begin life anew in America. Surely this narrative resonates for so many of us whose families arrived here in American cities around the turn of the 20th century. My Bubby settled with family in Manhattan's Lower East Side neighborhood. So many Jews found refuge in Philadelphia and Boston and Baltimore. Others arrived in Galveston and Savannah, and the list goes on. 55,000 Jewish immigrants settled here in Chicago, settling around the intersection of Halsted and Maxwell Streets. Some 2 million East European Jews landed on American shores between 1881 and 1914. For Jews, violent attacks known as pogroms sparked many a decision to risk life and fortune here in the New World. However, the root causes of the mass migration lay deeper. It was in overpopulation, oppressive legislation, economic dislocation, forced conscription, wretched poverty, and crushing despair, coupled, of course, with tales of wondrous opportunity in America. When they arrived, they relied heavily on family who were already here, and assistance from agencies such as HIAS, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society. Let me tell you about someone else. Izzy Balin was born on May 11th, 1888, in a Russian village near the Siberian border. A pogrom in 1893 persuaded his parents, Leah and Moses, to bring their family to New York, settling nearby to where my family lived in Lower Manhattan. After his father's untimely passing, young Izzy found his first steady job on the Bowery, looking after blind Saul, a singing beggar. This opened a door for Izzy to go out on his own, plugging songs in Union Square and working as a singing waiter in Chinatown. Within a year, he published his first song, Marie from Sunny Italy. Yes, you know Izzy better as Irving Berlin, who set the tone and the tempo for tunes that Americans played and sang and danced to for much of the 20th century. Berlin's story was not just a classic rags to riches story, but a classic immigrant story of overcoming great odds to thrive in the New World. God bless America, Berlin wrote, land that I love, from the mountains to the prairies to the oceans white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. The narrative of our people being strangers and finding home is our most powerful foundational story. After all, the Jewish people are called Ivrim, after our biblical forefather, the person we read about in this Torah this morning, Abraham the Hebrew. The three-letter root of the word Ivrim, or Hebrews, are the letters Ayin, Vet, Resh, Avar, meaning one who passes over or through. Indeed, we have navigated deserts and crossed seas in search of home. Just consider the story that we tell seated around the Passover dinner table. The Haggadah reminds us that we know the bitterness of slavery, and we remember the 40 years that we wandered as refugees in the wilderness. Now, as a free people, it is our Jewish obligation to look beyond ourselves and acknowledge with love all who remain oppressed, all those who are unable to live the life they deserve and wish to live. Scholars also suggest that our name, Ivrim, or Hebrews, is related to the word apiru, a Semitic language term for stateless folk. Our people have been persecuted and then exiled throughout history. And our tradition, therefore, invites us to empathize with stateless people around the world. We are reminded so many times in Torah, you too must befriend the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. The Torah compels us, always remember. Hear me now. The news media may assert that this is a partisan claim, but I stand here today to say that this is our people's history of estrangement that compels us as one Jewish family to know that politics have nothing to do with this. Longtime NSCI members Martin Lovey and Florence Goodman and Edward X of blessed memory remembered. Inga Rothschild remembered. Arthur Pankow remembered. They remembered that we are commanded throughout the Bible to befriend the stranger, for we too were once strangers. It's why on August 13th, 1979, NSCI's Board of Trustees opened conversation about resettling international refugees here in Highland Park. Detailed minutes exist in which our synagogue leadership strategized how best to welcome Vietnamese families who were fleeing oppressive legislation enforced by a communist regime. On January 16th, 1980, NSCI welcomed the Tran family, refugees from Vietnam. Our community fundraised, rented an apartment for them in nearby Highland Park, cooked meals, and tutored them in English. One family loaned their station wagon, and others helped the adults secure employment. Lily Greenebaum, the same Lily who greeted you today with Jim at the will call tent. Well, Lily remembered that commandment to care for the less fortunate when she drafted a letter to NSCI's Board of Trustees on November 9th, 1981. The Sisterhood Board requests that more of our programs be social action oriented, she wrote. Lily, who fled Nazi Germany herself, warned us, we must shake our membership from their apathetic slumber. Surely Lily's words resonated powerfully then as they do now, particularly at this season of Rosh Hashanah, marked by the sounding of the shofar. Echoed in our High Holy Day liturgy, each blast of the shofar urges us, wake up, sleepers, from your sleep. arise from your slumber, startling us from the humdrum of our daily lives into renewed awareness of the world around us. A broken world, we know, desperately in need of caring hearts and strong hands to assist in its rebuilding. NSCI's Refugee Resettlement Project was an opportunity for this congregation to unite in the sacred work of tikkun olam, of bettering our world. Synagogue lay leaders and volunteers acted swiftly, despite polling data revealing that a majority of Americans would rather have closed our borders than act in ways that would encourage the resettlement of Vietnamese boat people here in our neighborhoods. NSCI chose to act in accordance with the Jewish values on which this community was founded: inclusivity, welcoming, and caring for society's most vulnerable. One Orthodox rabbi, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, teaches, immigration will always be an important part of our political discourse, but we must remain vigilant in the way that we frame the issues, as the rhetoric we use to debate them. There is no place in this debate for prejudice or xenophobia and the appeal to baser instincts of fear toward the stranger. Let me be clear. Many thoughtful, kind-hearted, well-intentioned individuals have expressed concern that welcoming refugees comes with potential risk. They are right. It does. However, the family that we will help to settle here in Chicago will have already been vetted under our government's extremely extensive standards and will be introduced to us by Refugee One, a well-respected international resettlement agency. No matter who you voted for in the last election, Republican or Democrat or Independent, as a Jewish community, we need to remember that it is our moral convictions that should call us to this work. And this right here is an opportunity for all of us together to rise above partisanship and unite under the best and most universal aspirations of our tradition. It seems to me that there are two moral propositions for us. Either the world's refugees are in fact our people, and therefore we have no choice but to help our own. Or today's refugees are in fact strangers, but our faith demands nothing less than radical empathy for them, because we remember their plight. Torah reminds us, you too must befriend the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. In his analysis of our modern-day refugee crisis, again, Rabbi Sachs reflects, I used to think that the most important line in the Bible was love your neighbor as yourself. Then I realized that it is easy to love your neighbor because he or she is usually quite like yourself. What is hard is to love the stranger, one whose color, culture, or creed is different from yours. And that's why the command, love the stranger, because you were strangers, resonates so often throughout the Bible. And it is summoning us now. Today, I am humbled, delighted, eager, and honored to invite you to join in a renewed call for action. This fall, North Shore Congregation Israel will join the ranks of countless religious institutions around the country and once again help to settle a refugee family here in the Chicagoland area after they have completed 2 to 3 years of the mandatory U.S. legal vetting process. With the assistance of Refugee One, an approved international resettlement agency, our goal is to have the family self-reliant 6 to 8 months after their arrival. We won't know their origin or family composition until 2 weeks before they arrive. While they are nameless and faceless at this time, we know they have fled war, persecution, and terror, and most likely speak no English. They are but a few of the 65 million refugees in limbo around the world who have lived in a temporary refugee camp an average of 17 years. Yes, 17 years. Imagine for a moment where you were 17 years ago. Consider how your life has changed since. The number 17 should ring incomplete to our Jewish ear. The number 18, or chai, we know, is the Hebrew symbol for life. It represents the fullness of life and our obligation as Jews to live life to its fullest. One less. 17 is substandard and incomplete, much like the wretched life lived in refugee camps, provisional housing that many occupy for a lifetime, or what must feel like a lifetime at least. Torah reminds us 36 times, double chai, or 2 times 18, that our people were once strangers in the land of Egypt, and so we must therefore empathize with the most vulnerable among us. We know what it is to wander the wilderness, sleeping in makeshift huts, uncertain of the future, and therefore our faith calls upon us to act. I invite you to visit our website, nsci.org, for more information about 17 NSCI's Refugee Resettlement Project. Please email or call me if you have any questions or would like to discuss this new initiative. Like North Shore Congregation Israel on Facebook to receive regular updates. As this community did in the 80s and then the 90s to help resettle the Tran family, and later Jewish refugees from the former Soviet Union and Ethiopia, we are seeking monetary contributions, donations of household items, both new and gently used, and volunteers to help with this awesome endeavor. Details about the project are on the synagogue website, nsci.org, and I'd like to invite you to join us next week on Yom Kippur at 3 o'clock in Perlman Sanctuary for an important conversation on this topic. In the 125 years since Irving Berlin's family and many of ours emigrated to the United States, the American Jewish community has established roots here, contributing greatly to the arts, sciences, politics, and business. Now in a position of fortune and power, far from the experience of wandering, Jewish tradition beckons each of us now more than ever to remember our people's journey and to utilize our power to help others whose current struggles are all too familiar. Doing this, we will honor those who assisted our families when they fled violence and persecution in search of home here in this country. I wonder how we will be remembered when the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren of today's refugees retell their foundational narratives. I pray that we will be remembered for our generosity, for our care, and for living up to our sacred obligation to welcome the stranger. Remembered for the way we helped them acclimate here in America, just as others did for my Bubbe and my Zadie when they arrived barefoot at Ellis Island.